Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the ETF webinar, Underpinning Excellence, Everything a SEND Manager Needs to Know. This is going to be delivered by Davina Jones from National and Barney Anglis from ADLZ Insight. Now, my name is Jane Finch, and I'm the Head of Specialist Teacher Education at National Star, which is a Grade 1 specialist college in Gloucestershire. But before I hand you over to the experts, I'd like to just go through a few practical things before we get started. First of all, the webinar is being recorded and it's going to be available in the SEND area of the ETF website. The slides are all accessible if anyone wants to access them using a screen reader, and there will be closed captions for all of the slides as well. The presentation from Davina and Barney will be around about 35 to 40 minutes. And then there will be the opportunity for you to ask questions. I'm sure there's going to be quite a lot of questions, hopefully. The questions are going to be captured throughout through the Zoom chat. So you can pose a question at any point and we'll capture this and manage them, and then we'll be presenting the questions to Davina and Barney after they've delivered their presentation, and we've got that open space for questioning. I'm sure you all have, and I've noticed as people have been joining that you've all got your video and microphone off. Thanks, everybody. I shall see you again at the end of the presentation and tell you a little bit more about the additional SEND opportunities that National Star is offering in collaboration with the Education and Training Foundation, and also to go through the questions. So now over to Davina.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We sort of have thought long and hard about what to put in the sector update, because obviously so much has happened since we last ran this programme in January 2020. There have been lots of changes. There's been the Education Select Committee report, there have been changes to Ofsted, and also we've had COVID-19 in the middle of all of this. So what was very busy in terms of policy and operational changes for the sector have been further compounded by the conditions in which we've all been working under since March and continue to work under. So thank you so much for giving up your time to join us this afternoon. What I thought might be helpful was for Barney and I to do a short update. I'm going to talk a little bit about the latest news from the SEND review, a little bit about Ofsted, how the interim phase is working, and then Barney is going to share his wisdom and thoughts in terms of supporting learners' mental health and further education. And I'm going to finish up just a little bit around personalised programmes, which is an area I know you're all very familiar with. If you do want to add any questions, if you pop them in the chat pane, Jane will sort those out while we're talking, just to try and make this as streamlined as possible. So really, the SEND review was announced in September 2019. This is a significant piece of work from the government, but it also follows hard on the heels of many other significant pieces of work and calls for evidence and inquiries and audit office reports, which I'm sure a lot of you have contributed to. So probably the most significant ones was the Education Select Committee inquiry, which ran, I think, for 18 months before it produced its findings in September 19. We then had the National Audit Office report, which looked at the way DfE had spent money on the SEND reforms. Although a lot of this work was focused in the school sector, it did still have implications for colleges as well. That was in September 19. and we had local government and ombudsman report around education, health and care plans in October 19. So really, the perfect storm was there. It is clear that the SEND reforms have not delivered the results that were planned for in 2014 when the Children and Families Act was implemented. So the government did announce this SEND review in September 2019. The latest information that I've seen that's come out from the Department for Education, which is going to have a look at in a minute. But really, it's going back to thinking about what was it the government set out to do in 2014. And it was to improve services available to families who need support, equip staff in schools and colleges to respond effectively to learners' needs, and to bring an end to the postcode lottery of provision. It was also a massive emphasis for the 2014 reforms was a lack of parental confidence in the system, and the system was very adversarial as well. Parents felt they had to fight for support, and they weren't always able to guarantee the right support for their child or young person. I think the findings from the SEND inquiry, really a lot of those issues are still to be addressed. The government's view at the moment is it's added extra money to the system. It's recognised that the system was implemented without sufficient funding. It's added more funding for implementation and more funding directly to support the needs of complex learners. It's recognised that there are issues with the system with local authorities and education, health and care plans, and it's recognised that there are big issues joining up support between education, health and social care. The SEND review, when it was initially announced, looked at 5 key outcomes. So they wanted to investigate, were outcomes for children and young people ambitious enough? Were schools and colleges preparing young people to transition into adulthood and effectively move into employment, community occupation, making a contribution to their community and living as independently as possible? They wanted to look at parental confidence, whether the SEND system is supporting children to thrive and how easy the system is for parents to navigate. They wanted to look at right time and right place in terms of meeting needs. And a lot of this is looking at specialist and general education and how those systems can be integrated and how local provision can be provided in an efficient way for all. They wanted to focus on building capacity, so thinking about the knowledge and skills that are available for staff to develop their expertise around working with more and more complex learners, and local performance as well. So changing that variety that you get from county to county in the postcode lottery of provision. So this is where the government started in September. They carried out a couple of focus group meetings. I mean, I certainly attended one hosted by CDC back, I think it was November last year. And I know that there was a lot of engagement that was carried out in a variety of places across the country. They've now narrowed these 5 key outcomes down to 3 areas, which kind of encompass the 5 outcomes, but maybe in a slightly better way. Key area 1 is around high quality outcomes for young people supported by the most appropriate services in education, health or care. So this is a really interesting way to phrase it, particularly in the college sector, because a key area that they want to look at is post-16 and employment, the last bullet point here. So any reform to the SEND system will need to take account of the specific needs of the post-16 and an explicit focus on the post-19 population. So some of that thinking is around what services are being delivered by education, what services are being delivered by health, what services are being delivered by care, and how to bring those services together around transition for young people into adulthood. So I think that potentially offers a really good opportunity for colleges to take forward some of the recommendations from this review, because colleges are really well placed to bring those services together around transition for people into that next stage of life. The thing to think about here as well is a lot of the joining up of services, certainly around health and social care as well. A lot of the emphasis is upon the employment and independence outcomes for young people. So it's just remembering as well, as a college with the breadth of the SEND population that you have, is how to articulate and express those broadest outcomes for really complex learners who may not be moving into paid employment and who may not be moving into supported or independent living. So it's how to ensure that those learners' programmes are recognised and those outcomes are valued for complex learners as well. The second area the DFE have chosen to look at is looking at prioritising mainstream and meeting the needs of the majority of children with SEND in mainstream colleges, mainstream schools. This is interesting for colleges because obviously you take young people with a variety of backgrounds from schools, from special schools, from some specialist colleges, then move into general further education colleges. So there's lots to think about in terms of this. I think that something quite interesting in this element is when the SEND reforms were first being thought about back in 2011, a lot of the discussion in the Green Paper was around working together, blended provision as in joint specialist and mainstream provision, and how to work more in partnerships, the further education sector, to deliver a variety of experiences that enable young people to move on. And I think this universal offer is quite an interesting bullet point here from DFE, where it's talking about what is an expectation of a school or college, and then where can specialist partnerships and specialist workforces, where can we join up with other specialist services? And this isn't just only specialist education providers, but a lot of the emphasis in the SEND inquiry was around linking up with therapies as well. So I think one of the recommendations from the inquiry was mapping the therapeutic provision available across the country, working out where there were hotspots, where there wasn't quite so much, and making that therapeutic provision available to people in mainstream college settings as well. So I think there's something interesting here in terms of partnership working and how to embed more of those specialist services in a general college offer. The third area that the SEND review is looking at is making education, health and care plans, processes and documentation hopefully more streamlined and consistent. So there's been a huge recognition that the bureaucratic burden that education, health and care plans have placed upon the sector. Certainly a lot of staff time is spent administering plans, gathering evidence, preparing for reviews. So I think there's something around thinking about how education, health and care plans can how the process can be working for the young people it's designed for, instead of what it has become, which is a slightly bureaucratic nightmare. And again, the emphasis in this section is around bringing health and social care together as well. So using the plan to bring health and social care together to the table to make sure that children and young people get the provision that they need. And again, another link in here is this idea of specialist provision and specialist sector being funded locally for those with the most complex needs. So it's thinking about the needs that you currently meet within your SEND cohort at your college or at your educational institution, because I know that some of you are from an adult education background, and thinking about what can you do to fully meet those needs or meet a broader group of needs within your organisation, and how you can partner to do that. So those are the sort of steer that we have so far from the DFE, from the SEND review. So the expectation is they will publish something at the beginning of next year. I've heard January and I've heard February. So given the current situation, I think maybe March something might actually appear. So we will wait and see. But that is the main themes of what they're looking at. Certainly communication from local authority with us as a college is many of them are waiting to adjust policies or make decisions based upon what comes out of the SEND review. So it would be quite interesting to start engaging with local authority partners, certainly where you've got learners funded with education, health and care plans, to start thinking about what the impacts of the SEND review might be for your college or organisation. The second area I just briefly want to look at is the Ofsted interim phase. So this is quite interesting for colleges, because obviously Ofsted had started a new inspection framework, which they ran from September till March when they suspended inspections. They have then started this interim phase of monitoring visits in effect, which have started from September 2021. 2020, I haven't quite got there yet. So for these monitoring visits, they are looking at providers that they've not seen for a very long time. It doesn't matter whether you're outstanding or not. If they haven't seen you for ages, they are likely to appear, and they're looking for providers who have been inspected and require improvement. So I think if they've seen you recently and if you're good, you're probably okay. So the intent is to return to normal inspections in January 2021, but I'm not sure. Everything, is so up in the air at the moment. I'm not sure whether that will actually happen. They've chosen 3 themes to focus on in these monitoring visits, and they really are themes in response to the coronavirus pandemic. So it's looking at actions leaders are taking to ensure appropriate curriculum, steps leaders, managers and staff are taking to ensure knowledge is being built and meeting the reasonable needs of learners, and how you're ensuring learners are safe and well informed about potential risks. I think they are very focused on a sharing conversation, which is looking at how each organisation, each college has responded to the pandemic, the actions that they've put in place, and how staff and learners have been supported throughout this period of time. What I've done is I've looked through the 10 letters that they've issued so far, and I've picked out the key things under the 3 areas. I've tried to look at, there's a variety of providers in there. I've tried to focus where they're relevant to SEND or where they show particularly good practice. So looking at actions leaders are taking to ensure an appropriate curriculum. A lot of the emphasis on here is around digital skills. It's around training of staff critically to ensure that staff can deliver an online curriculum or have a range of ways in which they can deliver and engage with learners. So I think a lot of what has come out in these conversations, which reflect good practice, has been that investment in staff and staff support. I think it's around how good practice has been shared in the organisation, and how curriculum has been tweaked, redesigned, reconfigured, loaded in a different way so that the knowledge-based things are delivered online and the practical things are left. I think it's looking at how each package has been made bespoke to high needs and EHC plan learners, so that they can still meet those outcomes within their packages as well. Certainly one trend that I think we've seen in the specialist sector, and I think is starting to emerge in the general further education sector, is where learners have got particular therapeutic needs, or they have got staff support needs. A lot of the teaching and learning has become one-to-one sessions. And this has its pros and cons. For some learners, they've flourished in this one-to-one environment, and for some learners, they've desperately missed the social contact of peers. But because of the support requirements to engage in learning, online learning has not been a great platform for that. So I think it's the same is true of anything, isn't it? You're going to get some people where it suits really well, some people where it doesn't work at all, and a group in the middle which are experiencing a sort of good range of, some people are okay and some not so much. But I think it's what's quite interesting to see is the way in which providers are checking with their learners and understanding how their learners can engage, and then adapting the way they're delivering the curriculum to those learners. The second area that Ofsted are looking at is the approaches used to build knowledge and skills appropriate to the needs of learners. Again, this has been really interesting, certainly from a supported internship, traineeship, work skills type activity. A lot of job coaching has happened online, a lot of mock interviews, a lot of work with employers has happened online with Zoom, being able to take part in sort of interview practice, skills assessment. Those kind of things have lent themselves particularly well with that cohort of learners to take place online. An interesting thing came out where one college was using online sessions to introduce topics and to get a grounding in the material, and then they were having one-to-one face-to-face sessions to get a deeper understanding of that material. So there was lots of nice practice there for learners who were looking at work skills type activities. The same was true of the independent living skills. So you had a lot of things like embedded maths in cooking and those kind of things. So that actually worked quite well. I think one thing that came out of this was support for well-being. So I think leaders and staff recognised the stress that learners were under and actually built well-being into the curriculum, mindfulness, relaxation, art therapy, those elements. They built them into the curriculum to be delivered to learners where possible via online learning, just to give another element for learners to take part in. There's also a variety of content as well, so a lot of mobile sharing, using mobile phones, and joining of groups on social media platforms, closed groups, which is quite important, leading us to our next point of the final area Ofsted was looking at, was how learners stayed safe and were informed about risks. So a lot of these safeguarding procedures were adapted during the pandemic. I certainly know we got updated policies and procedures to follow, and prioritised really how to work with particularly vulnerable students as well. Again, digital resources such as laptops, any technology that people needed were issued, and risk assessments for students were carried out, and additional support provided in a variety of ways. I mean, I think every every college has done this, has looked at how to make sure those learners who haven't got the resources that they need can still engage in learning where possible. I think there was quite a lot of good online safety stuff. A lot of colleges used online learning where you had to have particular keys to log into certain sessions. That worked particularly well, and an emphasis as well of cyberbullying, scam emails, how to avoid those things as well. And then there was the interim phase that started in June with learners coming back into campuses, and certainly in September as well, where Ofsted are interested in the steps that are taken to keep learners in bubbles and to have those very clear areas of who went where, the staff that were attached to them, and how to keep people safe. But I think most of all, there was a really ongoing emphasis throughout the whole thing that looked at the mental health and well-being of students and staff together. I think this was a key theme that emerged, that this is certainly how organisations have responded to ensure the well-being of all the individuals that it comes into contact with is really important. And to talk a little bit more about that, I'm going to hand over to Barney, who is going to talk to us about mental health in further education. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Davina. So as Davina said, mental health is a particular focus, and the circumstances of the pandemic mean that this is an even greater priority. So we've designed a part of the program to give a brief introduction to principles of assessment in mental health and intervention and strategy. And I'm going to address the question, how can the FE sector support learners' mental health during the pandemic? So in this part of the program, I've organized the question around three aspects. Firstly, exploring learners' own experiences of COVID wave 1 and COVID wave 2. And secondly, assessing individual learners' needs and identifying opportunities for growth and development. And one of the issues which arises both from mental health needs and from the pandemic is the possibility that a learner may wish to change the course that they're on, may wish to, if you like, take a break. I know many students who are currently uncomfortable with the challenges that lie ahead. And what we have in this area is a duty of care to ensure that we do not make mental health needs greater as a result of pursuing inappropriate or impractical plans. And the third aspect is to look at research evidence that helps you support your planning for learners' mental health needs. And later in this presentation, I will give a couple of examples of research evidence around particular interventions for mental health. So the course will look at how colleges can work with health services and other agencies to improve provision for mental health needs. Again, drawing on research evidence, reports from recent years, looking at how colleges and other providers can connect with agencies such as the local clinical commissioning groups. Of course, many general FE providers have students coming from different health trust areas, different clinical commissioning groups. So that's complex, but there is some evidence that working with clinical commissioning groups has benefits in terms of the support available in college and the outcomes for learners. Also looking at child and adolescent mental health services, because 16-year-olds obviously still access child and adolescent services, but then looking at the transition to adult mental health services. And for those of you who provide for adult learners, that'll be a very familiar and somewhat problematic service area. And finally, looking at a program which has been running for over a decade, the Children and Young People's Improved Access to Psychological Therapies. We will be examining where and when the Children and Families Act serves learners changing mental health needs. So it's important to think about not only the context of the different services which you can access, but it's also important to think about what are your duties? What does the law say about the way that you make decisions and involve young people? So the Children and Families Act is central, but universal is the requirement under the Equalities Act to make reasonable adjustments to meet mental health needs. So we will look at how you ensure that you can do that even in the circumstances of the pandemic. Next, how to apply the CARE Act principles to learners changing mental health needs during the pandemic. And of course, the CARE Act presents us with the concept of mental capacity, and we'll consider how the present restrictions affect learners' capacity and constrain their autonomy, their independence, and their ability to make decisions about their own lives. And then anticipating the impact for your learners of these restrictions, not just on how you work in your setting, but on how your local authorities are working and what the impact may be on tribunal processes. For example, you or your college may be involved either in an SEN tribunal or a disability discrimination tribunal. All of these have been impacted by the restrictions that are now in place again. So we'll look at that in some detail. I said that we will be looking at research evidence, and as an example of this, just to give you a flavor, I want to highlight the work of Dr. Rebecca Lacey, who works at University College London, and who has been looking at the benefits, but also the limitations of a term which you may be familiar with, adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, as they are often referred to. And this has become quite a common way to measure what she calls the bad things that happen to children. It's essentially a model or a concept of screening for mental health risk. And some schools and colleges are adopting parts of the ACE model to try and identify the risk, but that in itself is problematic because ACEs as a piece of research is more about probability than individual outcomes. For example, Dr. Lacey highlights that ACEs assume each adversity is equally important for outcomes, which is not the case. And the ACE model ignores patterns or co-occurrence of adversities. So she gives the example that a child who witnesses domestic violence, divorce, and has a parent with mental health problems is assigned a score of 3 in the ACE screening model, which is the same as a child who experiences emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, implying that both children have the same risk of poorer outcomes. And that's an unlikely assumption. Another example is that ACE scores tell us nothing about the mechanisms at play. So we need to know about the effect of separate adversities, how they interact and co-occur, and their individual and combined effects. And that, of course, is very much the case as learners go through the education system, reaching further education and then adult education. And finally, there's an assumption that everyone with the same score will receive the same benefit from an intervention, regardless of what those adversities or combinations of adversities are, which simply isn't the case. One reader who visited the Association for Child and Adolescent Mental Health website, on which Dr. Lacey's work is featured, commented that most, if not all, of the 10 original adverse childhood experiences are associated with unsupportive, harmful parenting. And this begs the question, why aren't we working to elevate the quality of parenting in communities? Well, that has important implications for colleges, but I would also raise, and I will explore on the program, the possibility that there is too much focus on the effect of parenting as supposedly a course of adverse experiences and too little focus on environmental effects outside the home. So the Children and Young People's Improving Access to Psychological Therapists project, it's quite a long title, I'll refer to it as IAPT, is important because it's quite a long-running model and it's quite different from practice that we're used to otherwise. It draws on the research of Dr. Marku Wood, a consultant clinical psychologist in IAPT, Where Next? And we'll consider the implications of Dr. Marku Wood's work for college-based practitioners and community-based practitioners of certain specialized psychological interventions which have become more popular, such as behavioral activation and parent-led CBT. Of course, CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, but having parent-led CBT is a particularly interesting addition to the range of interventions, and graded exposure and other anxiety-based interventions. Anxiety, of course, features enormously among the range of mental health needs that are expressed in further education. And we'll be considering what demands these interventions make of student support services, even if they are being delivered outside the setting. So, for example, how can student support services complement what therapists are doing with learners outside of their college setting? And then how do they change our perspective on educational outcomes? If you consider the outcomes section of an education, health and care plan, should we then review and amend outcomes there to reflect the aims of therapeutic interventions such as those I've just mentioned? And then in the final part of this section of the program, we'll be considering high needs and complex needs, the changing pattern of choices, demands, and directions for learners with high needs and complex needs in the future post-COVID. So we will aim to learn how our understanding of high needs and complex needs is changing. Firstly, in the context which Davina explained of the SEND policy review, and then understanding high needs funding and other sources of funding for your learners. It's important to consider how you can maximize funding, manage your budget, and develop your people as part of the same process. And then how do you collect data? How useful is data? And how does it contribute to recruiting learners with special needs? Providing appropriate student services support, including effective information, advice, and guidance, and establishing impactful practice that you can evidence and explain, particularly during the process of inspection, but also as part of the college strategy. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Davina, who's going to look at personalizing practice.
Great, thank you so much, Barney. Just to remind everybody, if you do want to raise a question, if you could pop it in the chat pane, that would be great, because then Jane can organise and group questions to hopefully make sure we cover everybody's inquiries. I just want to very briefly look at personalising programmes. It's something that we do focus on as part of the programme that we offer. And it's something which I think everybody has, you know, a great experience of, and it's something you're obviously all doing already. Just to think about the impact of the coronavirus pandemic and maintaining a high level of personalisation has obviously posed challenges during this period of time. And I think there are key things that can still be focused on. One is focusing on the outcome for the learner. So this is really important, that we're still looking at the outcomes that learners are with us to achieve. This final bit of education, this further education, really is so important in terms of that step into adult life and setting the young person up for the best that adult life has to offer. That it is really important to look at those outcomes and think about the networks in the community and in the learners community that you need to support those outcomes going forward. And again, I think given that some learning is taking place online, some learning is taking place face-to-face, it's thinking about what are the support networks that can help you with this last delivery of education before the young person progresses to adult life. So it's looking at strategies that learners can really engage in and that match the way that they are going to live in the future, that I think prove to be of most benefit. And again, it's certainly something we ran a project over the summer, looking at working with networks in learners' home areas. So we have a lot of residential learners. They move into adult life in a variety of places across the UK. And we looked at sending teams out to those places to work with care teams, work coaching teams, employers, home, you know, parents, families, carers, brothers, sisters, to really make sure that the progress that the young person had made while they were with us and the way in which we've worked with that young person whilst they've been residentially at college is passed on, shared, updated, and then contextualised in the adult life that young person is moving into. And again, you know, as Barney spoke so clearly about, is we do have to evidence the progress that young people make, and we have to be able to be accountable for the work that we've done. So thinking about meaningful ways for you and your learners to measure progress towards outcomes. This is something we talk a lot about, the support journey for learners as they come into college, that onboarding experience, how those personalised packages are created, how we get feedback from the learners and their views about their experiences. So it's not about whether they've achieved a particular piece of knowledge or ticked a box, it's their overall experience that they're asked to talk about. And they're asked to talk about that, and their family and support network are asked to comment upon that as well. And how do you actually use that information and use that data to inform your curriculum design and planning? So that's something we do spend quite a bit of time talking about during the programme. Finally, it's looking about attributing experiences in the right way. So this is looking at impact and understanding what is the activity that you're doing and how is it making a difference to a young person's life. So it's looking at all of those measures. So not only who helps you, who have you engaged with, what helps you, what has made the difference, what has been the thing that has unlocked this learning experience for you. And understanding from the widest network, the support network within the college and externally as well, what has engaged the young person and what has made a difference to their progression on from college. So that's something that we spend quite a bit of time on as well. I'm going to hand back to Jane now, and she's going to talk a little bit more about how you can sign up for the 2-day programme, and also then we will look at some questions and answers. I hope you've enjoyed today, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thank you so much, Davina and Barney. That was really very, very interesting. And we'll give everybody a little bit of a flavour of what we would be covering on the 2-day programme. We've been delivering a 2-day programme successfully in collaboration with the Education and Training Foundation for about the last 18 months. Obviously, it came to a bit of a halt from March this year, but the intention is to continue with this 2-day programme going forward in 2021. And the way it operates is that it will be provided as what we call an in-house course. So if any of you from any of your organisations are interested in having a fairly sort of tailor-made course that really addresses some of the issues or the concerns that you might have within your organisation, then we can provide this 2-day programme. As it's an ETF course provision, there is a cost involved, and the cost has a variation depending on the number of people within your organisation on the programme. But if you're interested in any of this, please email me or give me a ring. Probably email is best, because then we've got a record of all that we've talked about. So the 2-day programme would be covering much of what Davina and Barney have been talking about today, but obviously with an update from the review that Davina has mentioned that will be at the start of next year, but also concentrating on how you support your SEND learners, your STEM curriculum, the programmes that you offer, hopefully post-COVID, and particularly in supporting the mental health needs of your students and your staff. So my details are there, as I said earlier, for those people who joined after I did my initial little introduction. This webinar will be available on the SEND area of the ETF website. And of course, I'm available if you have any queries or questions relating to the 2-day programme. As Davina mentioned, there's an opportunity for you to ask questions using the chat panel. If we give you a couple of minutes for people to maybe think of a question, and then we will ask Barney and Davina if they have an answer straight away. If not, we can capture your question and we'll be circulating an answer after the end of the webinar. So over to you. If you have questions, please pose them, and then we will, what's time, 6:18, we'll have minutes to answer these.
Maria, yes, the slides will. Oh, Jane and I are now talking over each other. Yes, we can make the slides available. There will be a recording of the webinar on the ETF website, but certainly, I mean, I think we've got your email address anyway from the joining information, so we can make sure we send you a copy of the slides if that's helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I emailed the majority of you this morning, so I'm quite happy to send through a copy of the slides, as well as having the webinar available on the ETF website. That's absolutely fine.
Thank you.
Another question here that have we got any details of the 2-day course? I'll send out some information to all of you after the webinar as well, along with the slides. But certainly, as the in-house courses or the programs are very much tailor-made to the organisation, it's well worth having a conversation about this as well. But I will certainly send out some information about the course along with the slides of the presentation. Thank you for that question. Are there any others coming through?
That's nice.
Oh, right, that's very nice.
Thank you, Amanda.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's really been very informative. As you can gather, Davina and Barney are experts in the area, and you know, we're in a very uncertain time at the moment. So it's very useful having some quite positive and concrete information going forward. Yeah, there was a question there about, will there be time to ask questions later? Yes, of course. Please use the emails or email me and I will forward anything to Davina and Barney. Oh yeah, yeah, I'll just answer that one. Yeah. Thank you. A lot of people saying thank you, so thank you as well for being here and listening to the webinar. Okay. Davina, Barney, and everyone really, are there any personal recommendations, either from Davina or Barney, that they could give to colleges at this present time?
Davina, if you don't mind, I'll go first there. I'm also a trustee of a schools trust, and we are considering every day what should we be doing next. And the most important thing is to have your remote learning strategy available to everyone, to staff and to learners and to families. And I want to mention something which came up in Davina's slides, which she had drawn from the Ofsted visits. And it's the issue of continuing therapy input during COVID restrictions. And Ofsted have commented on that. And it is an issue that I'm dealing with at the moment in the context of Further Education College. It's really important that providers have worked out how to continue as far as possible with therapeutic services and counseling services and mentoring services. Continuity is absolutely vital. If you can't continue a service for a learner, you really need to understand the impact of that on the learner and start planning ahead. But this is particularly relevant to speech therapy and to counseling. So those are urgent considerations.
I think I would add to that in terms of supporting your staff, I think is really key at the moment. And that support may take a variety of forms. So I think sort of early in the pandemic, it was looking at staff training, providing resources for staff, giving them physically what they needed to do their jobs. And now I think it's more around emotional and well-being support for staff to enable them to carry on doing their jobs in what are, you know, really tricky circumstances, which look like they will continue into next year. It's really making sure that staff are valued, supported, that the situation doesn't become normalized in effect, so people stop taking the extreme conditions that some people are working under as seriously. And then the other thing, which I'm sure everybody always does, is just really putting the learner at the heart of everything and thinking of all those decisions and just prioritizing what those young people's needs are. Thinking about how they affect the family and support network around those young people as well, because you know, it is a time where looking at those like wider networks and you know, all the things that are happening, it's really important to try and keep an open mind.
There's another little point here though about I mean, I agree, it's really vitally important to be putting the learner at the centre, but then with learners having been at home a lot and the support for the parents, so how can colleges support parents when the learners become either too anxious so that they're disengaged, or, you know, from lack of input, lack of that social interaction, become disengaged as well?
I think this is something, I mean, I've heard Barney talk about this really well on many occasions, and that's being an advocate for the parents as well as the young person. So sometimes you know, it's taking on that role where you're brokering a solution, you're supporting the parents broker a solution with social care, with, you know, CAMS, with adult mental health services, with any health or social care services as well. So I think lending weight to that parental voice, I think, is really important. And I think the supporting parents with disengaged learners, as well as thinking back to that really flexible thinking of, from the learner's point of view, what is a priority for that learner? Where are they trying to get to? What motivates them? And really just keying into that. And it's those small steps to begin with, leading hopefully to you know, the learner buying back into education longer term. And then really, it's that holistic view as well, looking at all the things that are happening in that learner's life. So looking at, you know, whether there is you know, extreme poverty, domestic violence, any of those additional factors which are going to add stress and pressure into that situation. Barney, I don't know.
Thank you. Sorry, I talked over you, but there's a really good point here from Amanda about the fact that there's been disruption, lost time. Do you know, is there any inkling of thought from the government or the department that EHCPs will be extended? Because say you might have a person who's 23, 24, and they've lost virtually a year of their EHCP funded education and life skills time.
I know. I think this is interesting. This came up in Wales. This went to Welsh Government. They actually debated this, where it was one of Michael Charles, the solicitor, raised this in Wales, and he raised it in England as well, whether the government would extend the age deadline on EHCPs. Both Welsh Government and Department for Education came back with an emphatic no. So I would say not. I would say local authorities, you could look at individual cases. And I think one way of looking at it would be to get social care to fund an additional extension of a placement, which is certainly something which I think has happened at National Staff for an over 25-year-old, but I would need to double check that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. I'm very conscious of the time and that some people are having to leave. And I think Barney has also got another appointment coming up fairly soon. So if it's okay with everybody, we will wind up now. But please do get in touch if you've got any further questions or any comments, or if you're interested in the 2-day programme, please do get in touch. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining the webinar. I do hope you found it interesting. Thank you to Davina and Barney. And
Thank you.
stay well, everybody, and thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.